any war game, anytime.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Any War Game Anytime. I'm Daniel. I'm joined by Bozz today. Sam's unfortunately out today, having to do that whole work thing, so making money. So unfortunately, Sam can't join us today. We're also joined by a special guest, Ryne. We'll get into him to a second, but Bozz, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I was at a gaming convention over the weekend, FerretCon in Sheffield in the UK, which was playing a bunch of Nordic Weasel games. Ivan, of course, we had on as our guest
Yeah,
last
that's
week, and I
good.
completely forgot to mention that I was going to his the convention of his games on the weekend. So I did. It was fun. We'll talk about it some other time, but yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, me and Sam also had a blast this weekend. We got a chance to go to Dallas and we played in a one-page rules Age of Fantasy skirmish game that Ryne runs. So, give you a little preface on Ryne. He's sort of the organizer of the Dallas one-page rules gaming group. So, Ryne, how you doing, man?
I'm a little tired. I flew into Boston this morning for work. So I know Sam's out for work, but I didn't want to make an excuse. I still wanted to be here. Uh, but yeah, I've been wargaming for, I guess, most of my life. Started off with a Space Hulk back in the 90s. And about a couple years ago, you know, things were going on with other war games. And I remember going online and saying, "Hey, why don't we write our own rules?" Well, turns out somebody beat me to it. That's how I found one-page rules and started doing tournaments from there.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool that you're already kind of thinking in that vein. Yeah, and we he's got such a great. Me and Sam are so jealous. Does a great job running the OPR scene over there. Super cool guy. And one of the things that we're glad to have Ryne on is not only is he a good player, he's a pretty good player. Don't let him fool you. But also, he's involved in the tournament scene, and and so one of the things in our continuing discussions about, uh, we are interested in making OPR, sort of, I would call a competitive compendium to OPR. And we don't have all the answers right now. But one of the things we wanted to do is get Ryne on, me and Bozz. All of us are big Grimdark fans, and sort of maybe have some initial discussions about, how could we make OPR more competitive? I would say this more specifically for high level competitive players. Some of our suggestions probably aren't going to be for everyone. If you're a we want to give a caveat here. If you're a fun player, if you enjoy just having a blast, hey, don't listen to anything that we say, right? OPR is fun. OPR is great. We love it. But I think as sort of all three of us are people who do love the competitive side. Hey, what could we do to make it a little more competitive, just for competitive players, right? And like I said, if you're a fun player, if you enjoy it, hey, no worries. Just ignore everything we say. You can just quit the podcast right now. But so with that in mind, first of all, I want to kind of give Ryne, what are your sort of thoughts on OPR being competitive? Do you just sort of what do you think about that?
I think that obviously it's going to need some work to be competitive, but one of the beautiful things about OPR is that it's so open source that you can take it and just put any little spin on it. I feel that we're gonna start seeing more groups around the world as OPR becomes more popular. Try to do the same thing we're doing and develop a tournament format for it. And as they develop, as it evolves, we'll start sharing ideas online. And I can imagine, if this keeps going, we'll have a DF or a Dallas format tournament format. We'll have a European format, what have you and whatnot. And again, I think as we start coming up with ideas, it will all align together as the good ideas rise and the bad ones fall. Hopefully, I won't have any bad ones here today.
Well, and everything we say here may be a bad idea. I've got to preface this. We're going to be tossing some ideas that we haven't really play tested as much. So, hey, we're open to criticism. We're open to it. Bozz, what do you kind of think about kind of the competitive side of OPR? Do you kind of agree with Ryne, or what do you think?
Well, first of all, you got to have your bad ideas to recognize the good ideas, yeah? And to correct something you said, Daniel, ever so slightly, I'm not actually a huge competitive player myself. I'm much more geared towards casual play. But having said that, I appreciate the competitive, gosh, that was the wrong way to say that, competitive potential of the OPR rules list. And I'm a really big proponent of sharing the system with as many people as possible. So it's in my best interest to be working on a way to make that happen as well for the people who are ultra competitive, even if that doesn't necessarily include myself. So I think I'm in complete agreement with Dan in that it isn't something that we should rely on OPR to do, because as Ryne said, it's really great open source rules that you can put your own spin on. You can skin it up to be whatever you want it to be. And we should take that as players and run with it. So this idea of having, yes, this is how the Dallas scene plays it, this is how the New York scene plays it, this is how the UK scene plays it, whatever, I think that's a really cool idea. And the more community input we have from people who are passionate about competitive play and from people who might not be, but might have something to contribute as well, I can only see that as a good thing.
Yeah. I would say this. I know Bozz is a good player, and I guess I sometimes do equate that to. I would say this: me and Bozz, we've had some conversations, and I always your insight into the competitive scene, the way you talk about it, you do have that insight that you are thinking about balance, and so
don't get me wrong, I love to win.
Yeah,
I love to play, and I love to win, like we all do. I'm just not I will always pick a fluffy list that's hopefully got some winning potential over a purely competitive list, just because that's my jam.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So what we'll do is that each of us are going to sort of go through some suggestions. And I'll start first, and then we'll have Ryne and then Bozz. And just so you know, each of us, our suggestions, we haven't really discussed it with each other. So and nor are any of our suggestions, people, in other words, we all may disagree with each other's suggestions. And I think that's great. I think it's, again, like Bozz was saying, let's get some ideas out there, and some of the bad ones just can kind of work themselves out. So for me, I think my biggest thing with OPR that I think can really help the game out is actually something that came from 40K, where I was originally playing OPR, and I'm trying to play with some 40K players here. And it really came from his suggestion, where he's like, hey man, I want to have some command points in here. I want to have some ways to reroll some dice and add some +1s. And, originally I didn't agree to it. I was like, well, that's not really what it's about. But it's funny that as I played it, I really enjoyed having some sort of command point structure that can not be what some of the OPR does, where it's like the doctrines, which get a little crazy. I just like a simple command point system that lets you sort of mitigate bad dice rolls. I know me and Sam, we've been playing a command point structure, which is one command point +1 to a single dice, 2 command points let you reroll all the dice for a roll, and 3 command points let you ignore a waiver. So not a route, just a waiver. And I found that really helps mitigate some of those bad dice rolls and some of those things that I think can make your OPR a little strong, which is that waivers in OPR are really strong. So what do you guys think about like a command? Like I know that's what we run, but what do you think about like, some sort of command point system, sort of dice mitigation?
I'd like to chime in on that. Yeah, we were experimenting over here in Dallas. I wouldn't say a command point system, but something similar to where in one of our the escalation leagues, we offered different what's the word I'm looking for? Upgrades for point costed to heroes, and as long as they were alive, they got to do certain things such as nudge a dice roll,
Mm.
uh, re-roll one die, or even automatically pass a morale, which is a big thing for OPR. So I like that idea. I think just going with the command points, just a simple system doesn't have to be super complex and help with that competitive scene. Obviously luck plays a part of it, but when you have made all the decisions right and you come to the very end of it and you fail a dice that you shouldn't have failed, and it just changes everything. That can it gives those feel bad feelings. So I like that idea. I really do. I think we should play around with that going forward.
Okay. Okay.
So I have to be the dissenting voice here. I detest command points. It
Mm.
was my absolute least favorite aspect that was introduced into 40K. I know, and I'm hearing everything Ryne says and agreeing. Yes, the dice are fickle. Yes, you can do everything right, but still have the dice kind of give you that bad feeling moment. And they do suck. They absolutely suck. However, it's a game that relies on a dice mechanic and chance. What sucks worse is being that other player and thinking that you've done everything right and that you've actually made that roll. Oh, good, thank goodness I got a 2 instead of a 1. But the other player goes, aha, command point, that's a -1 to your roll. I don't like command points. Even as a competitive thing, I think make your plans, carry them out. If the dice are with you, they're with you. If they're against you, they're against you. Dissenting opinion, I know, but yeah,
No, it's fair, and I
that's
think
where I stand on it.
it is one of those things that I know is like I said, that I can definitely see Bozz's side of it. I come from that really where I was playing an Imperial Guard when I'm sorry, a Human Defense Force player, and he had these super heavy tanks that he was paying 1,000 points for, and I would literally charge him and do 1 wound on him, and it was literally a 4 up that thing gets wavered. Like, so I think and I think I don't know, that was where that sort of came from, but I can also understand Bozz's side of it, and maybe like I said, it's one of the things. So agreed.
I
Yeah.
think command points especially are really quite love 'em or hate 'em type things, and I just happen to come down on the other side of the fence. That doesn't make me,
Mhm.
right or wrong. It's just
Okay.
where I'm at with
Well,
it.
I'm gonna do another thing that may get some disagreement or one, but I'm gonna go for one here. And one of the things that so with 3.0, casters have just really become a lot more powerful. Spells and casters. And one of the things that I see a real problem with is different armies sort of it's really certain armies, if you don't get good spells, it's really bad. And certain armies that have the good spells, those armies are just head and shoulders above others. And that's the thing, like I wouldn't have said this in 2.0, but with the ability to sort of combine casters, combine tokens, it is one of those things that spells are a force to be reckoned with. And ultimately, the big thing, and this is something that would be a big thing. I ultimately sort of think that people should just be able to choose the spells that they want. It's like I think I come from Warhammer Fantasy where you were able to sort of pick your spells or pick your magic and I just think that any sort of pre-made army that like I go with like High Elf Fleets is a great example, who just have one level 3 spell which sucks, and like it's a huge deal. So I think ultimately that's really what I think in competitive scene is basically let people bring their own spell list, or I know that maybe it's a big one, but I sort of that's sort of what I felt with the caster thing, that it's too powerful, that you sort of need to level the playing field. You need to let everyone sort of bring the spells they want, and then at the very least, everyone is sort of on the same playing field. But yeah, all right,
So
let's hear the screams of agony.
you mentioned that I haven't gone through the 3.0 spell list yet, so I can't say anything on how some armies may have good spells versus others. But could you name an example of just an army that has like a good spell, a
Well, oh
bad
yeah,
spell cost, or
yeah.
I guess a good spell list, bad spell list?
So I think that a great example is dwarf. Dwarf guilds, I think, have some pretty bad spells. One, they're a slow army that they get flying at a level 3 spell. They get to give 2 units flying on an army that generally has slow. It's just, again, this is a capstone spell that oftentimes is just extremely circumstantial. Like flying on a movement 8 unit is just not that great. They also, I look at also dwarfs in Age of Fantasy, who dwarf guilds get a -1. So this is the other problem, is that buffs and debuffs in the game, buffs are just so much more powerful than debuffs. And you have armies that have 2 debuffs, which means you have to get point blank range up to the army to cast it. Where debuffs, you can be in the back of the field casting these really powerful buffs. There's also some level 3 spells which are just super powerful, like some of them that give you +2 AP on the charge. Like that's huge. Or shooting AP1, like, and that what I would say is like there is some armies that it's basically like the spell lists are super powerful. Like Kingdoms, like Human Empire is a great example in Age of Fantasy. The spells are so crazy good. Like, I mean, and they're all buffs, no debuffs. It's just, and so that's generally what I see, is that there's a lot of disparity in the spell lists, and I don't know. And in other words, that's the best way I think to balance it, is to just let people bring the spell list they want to bring. It can also help work with their army. Yeah, I don't know. And so yeah, that's my thought. I don't, that's the best thing I can come up with.
Well, I absolutely agree that something needs to be done to balance the casters, because yeah, I'm 100% with you on this. They're crazy good, and some, as you're saying, some forces that should have access to different spells don't. And you're right, giving everyone the chance to pick their own spells, like you can in the Army Forge builder, and you can only have so many buffs and so many debuffs, and I think it's a much more kind of balanced way to do it than some of the stuff that's actually been released. I would gear myself personally more towards figuring out a homebrew way to balance casters a bit more, rather than, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having everyone pick from the same list of spells. I do think that's a good idea, but I would kind of look a bit deeper again and go, how can we make it so casters aren't an auto take? I don't like anything that's so good that you couldn't possibly do without it.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot possibly do without spells in a competitive list, period.
Yeah, especially some armies. Some armies, their spell list are just head and like Human Empire, Age of Fantasy. I know I'm picking Age of Fantasy here.
Oh, I know, but it's true.
It's a bonkers spell list. It is a bonkers spell list. I mean, yeah. But yeah, so that's my other thing. And the last thing that I think can honestly probably help people is I generally am falling more towards around the 3,000 point competitive level. I know that's a little higher than 2,000. I've generally found that 2,000 is just too small, and there's too many sort of one-shot combos. Like I do see on a lot of the discords, there's a lot of people talking about balance, but when I sort of see what they're talking about, a lot of things to me sort of go back to you're playing at a very small point level, and you're just sort of, like you said, the other thing is that it's sort of arbitrary, because like I said, at 2,000, so many things can't be brought. And the armies that are really powerful at 2,000 are those that have that powerful unit that's just under that 600-ish point value, right? In other words, if they have a monster here that's just under that, that is that basically 38%, that army is at a huge advantage. So I think that 3,000 is sort of large enough that people can really bring whatever they need to, and also have the amount of, it's sort of like you have enough to counter when you have the hive tyrant flying in and just one-shotting your tank. Well, luckily you have enough to sort of mitigate that. So that's sort of where I would like to see about 3,000 for Grimdark Future to sort of be the competitive standard for me. That's the sweet spot for me.
So I agree with you that 2,000 points is too low. Our group has been playing tournaments at 2,500. 3,000, I've played a couple 3,000 point games. I feel that sometimes they can be a little too big and a little too time consuming. One of the things that our local group likes about OPR is the quickness of the games. I think that maybe somewhere in the mid, I'm willing to look into maybe do in our next tournament 3,000 points, but I feel like a better maybe middle ground would be 2,750 there as well. You still get my problem with 3,000, I guess, is that at that point you can get four spam units. I feel like 3 units is of the same is not so spammy, but that's just my thoughts on it. I do agree with you. 2,000 is too low. I think I'm on the fence about 3,000, but somewhere between 2,500 and 2,750, I think is the direction I'd like to go.
I will agree with you there. I do think that I would be okay with 3,000, but I do agree with you that you should be capping things at 3. I think and that's something I sort of disagree with OPR, is that they sort of continue to raise that up. I would say that I will agree with you there, is that I would say 3,000, but you do have to cap things at 3. Because yeah, you're right. It can get a little too spammy, but yeah, 27, like I said, 20, I can meet you there as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of there as well. Like 2000 is a wonderful pick up and play game. I don't think it'd have enough teeth for high level competitive gaming. As Ryne said, I wouldn't want it to get too unwieldy either. I don't want it to be a whole afternoon to play one game. If I did, I'd still be playing 40k. But 25, 2750, 3,000, they all seem like good levels to play, and a tournament could have 2 or 3 tiers depending on what kind of experience you wanted. Some people might go for that, high end maximum fielding units, 3,000 branch, whereas someone else might go, you know what, I've got a good list, but it's not quite so big. I can fit in 2 games to their 3 games. I'll play 250. 2,500 rather.
Yeah, and I think that I would say this. I am stipulating competitive play where people, they know the rules. Obviously speaking, if we're talking
that's what I'm assuming, yes.
Yeah. We're assuming these guys, there's not going to be this rules lookup. They're going to sort of, and I think at that point, 3,000 could pull back, but I'm willing to tweak on that. I've noticed in Kings of War that as people get better and quicker, point levels do start to slightly go up. But yeah, I'll agree to disagree. We'll kind of go from that one. All right, so that's what I sort of have. Ryan, what are you thinking? I'll pick your brain.
So in terms of encouraging more of a competitive format for OPR, something that I wanted to mention is I put heavy emphasis on a couple pre-game phases. One of them being terrain setup, because I feel like with the way that OPR plays, terrain does make a big difference. I mean, for every war game, right? For every war game, but some armies rely, I think, rely on certain terrain to face other army styles as opposed to others. Um, for example, we have a player who plays what are they called? The crew. I don't know what they're the jackals. Jackals. It has what I would call a uh, a strider archetype in terms of an army. Uh, he was not doing very well until we started implementing more use of terrain and whatnot, and how many pieces of terrain we should place, and how he can move around and basically just outmaneuver you at that point and hide where he needs to. But I think going forward, we should have a way where each player, right before the game begins, starts selecting pieces of terrain with minimum requirements for what is expected there, and take turns placing one by one. Um, I feel like I'm kind of I'm not saying it clearly, but I hope my thoughts are coming out. But forgive me, I've been up for a couple hours taking on a long flight, so
No,
I hope you guys.
I think that's coming out just fine.
Yeah. And I completely agree. I come from the Kings of War side of terrain setup where and this is something where a lot of people have been moving in our tournaments toward preset terrain, but I'm a big proponent of player placed alternating terrain, because to me that's how you really get the balanced piece. When you have two players sort of placing terrain like Ryne said, with minimum amount of requirements, you really basically both players get 50% of what they need.
Do you
When you
do that? Sorry to interrupt. Do you do that terrain placement before or after you've chosen which side is yours?
you do it before.
Right.
So
Cool,
you
cool.
do it before, you do objectives before, so you don't.
Yep.
So you're right, that forces people to not stack something here. But I found, in like coming from the Kings of War side of things, that you get your best, because what you really get is you get two players getting 50% of what they want, as opposed to preset terrain. It's always going to slightly benefit one player, because we can get into the types of terrain that get set up. But yeah, I agree with Ryne on that one. I think, and it's a big deal. I love that Ryne has brought it up. Terrain is a huge deal in balancing the game.
So let's have
Is
a
it really?
sorry, Ryan. So let's
I'm
have
sorry,
a
boss. I was.
you're right. Let's have a quick look at the other side of the coin. Say it's a tournament setting where you go in and there's 6 tables or 10 tables or whatever, and they're already all set up. You get your opponent in the draw, you get randomly assigned your table number, and you roll off to see who deploys on what side. In a tournament setting, I kind of think I'm trying to shy away from, better or whatever, because it's all completely subjective, of course. To me, that seems like the better way to do it. So maybe one person is advantaged over the other person, but I don't know. I kind of feel like that might be more true to this thing that we're trying to simulate, these kind of random encounters between opposing forces. That's not to say that I also can't see the merits of what you guys are saying, which is alternating placement, and at least everybody's not terribly unhappy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have, because I play such little competitive things. I haven't been to a tournament in decades. I haven't got that same vested interest of exactly what happens with terrain. I tend to just we set up an interesting board and then go from there. But I can absolutely see what you guys are saying. I just kind of wanted to offer the other side of it and maybe generate a bit of discussion about what makes that better or worse than what you guys are putting forward.
I think that I will. So coming from the Kings of War tournament scene, I will say that in an ideal world, what you're saying, Bozz, is great. Where the terrain is set up with people who are truly trying to think about it from a balanced perspective. But in the practicality perspective, when you have a third person set up terrain, that person perhaps likes shooting armies. Maybe they won't set up, or they don't like shooting armies, right? So they're going to set up this big thing that blocks shooting. It's one of those things that I've generally found the most balanced way is to have two players. When two players are picking half of the terrain, it's basically a compromise. No one gets exactly what they want, but also they get some of what they want. Where a third party, that third party isn't unbiased. They have, and so yeah,
Naturally.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one.
Well, that's interesting, and I can see exactly what you're saying.
Hmm. Oh, good stuff. What else you got, Ryne?
And with just point cost, Strider, you pay a premium for Strider. So being able to place terrain, alternating, and knowing that, I, as a Strider heavy army, I can put in an objective in some difficult terrain where other units may take 2 turns to control. I only need 1 turn to get in there. And then just going back for the example on the dwarf magic spell list, that 3 tier 1 that gives them all flying. That really does help the dwarves out in the end on those last minute grabbing objectives. Whereas dwarves are slow in the first place. When you put difficult terrain all over the place, no, they're really struggling. It'll
Oh,
take yeah,
oh. Yeah,
take
I'll
maybe
disagree on that one. Dwarves love difficult terrain. They love it. Love it.
you,
Because while people who are all these fast and regulars moving 12, it's only a 25% decrease. We go from a 6 rush, from an 8 rush to a 6. So I know as a dwarf player, I'll tell you, I love difficult terrain because it really hurts my opponent much worse. But yeah,
well, and
but I
well
see
that
your
just
point. I do see your point, though. I do get you about the flying. That is a point. I will agree with that.
it just feeds the example there. So no, using as a dwarf player yourself, you're saying that you love difficult terrain because it's you're gonna suffer it no matter what, right? And I'm sure when you go against those fast cavalry armies, you've brought them on your level at that point. You know
That's right.
uh, that now they can't outmaneuver you. I think the only thing that you would really struggle against is again those Strider armies, which are can still freely move through the terrain
Yeah.
and just run circles around you.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah. And you're hitting a great point with Strider. Like, you're right. There are armies, it's a premium that they're paying for. And if you play that army, you should have a say in the board, right? Because it matters to your strategy. Yeah. I
Yeah,
agree.
I think I'm going to change my answer and say actually those are all ridiculously good points. If I've included units in my army that have those extra points for this or that or the other, then I am actually going to want some say over my terrain. So yep, I'm officially changing my answer.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, yeah. That's terrific. Yeah, I love that. All right, Ryne, how else you want to fix the world? What else you got?
The other thing that we're finding here too, and it's just to kind of help out against creeping meta, where the same list, all the lists are the same, is introducing secondary objectives where anybody can pick from it every single round. And some of these secondary objectives can uh, can punish you for bringing specific army types, right? So let's say that we're going and everyone's doing the Strider strategy, right? Start introducing a secondary objective where every time you kill a unit with Strider, you can get a point there. It doesn't stop you from playing a Strider army, but now some people may choose not to do that because they don't want to practice at that Strider army to kind of go against the go against what they know people will be picking against them. And then just other stratagem, or not stratagems, I'm sorry, other secondaries that, of course, help your army on what it does, whether it's a shooty list, or a melee list. But something that we choose to do in our tournaments is that you can only pick one secondary throughout the entire tournament. So you can't, if you're a very heavy melee army, you can't keep picking that secondary that gives you points fighting in combat. You can only use it once per the tournament, and you've got to focus on other aspects if you want to get those secondaries in.
I
Yeah.
think that's great. I think it's and yeah, that's the kind of thinking that moves the whole scene forwards. I think is this acknowledgement of, yeah, even though it's OPR and whatever, there is going to be that creep, that meta that everyone's going to be chasing. And how do we mitigate that? How do we keep it fun, and how do we keep it interesting, and how do we keep it from coming so homogenous that everybody's running exactly the same list? Yeah, no, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, and I played the tournaments. I played over there and I really enjoyed it. I would say a tweak. I really love your secondaries. I would love it if it's two secondaries, one picked by you and one picked by your opponent.
Ooh,
So that then your opponent is sort of playing on, it's like if you want to bring an all shooty list and your opponent says you have a secondary where you have to use a lot of kill 3 wounds in hand to hand. I think that also sort of forces people to play more balanced lists. But I love the secondary. I would say that as more of an addition to that. What do you think about that, Ryne?
I like that idea. That's nice that your opponent can pick one and you pick one, because that really forces you to make a more balanced list. And don't get me wrong, I come from also a fighting game community where one of the things, you pick, like Street Fighter, Super Smash Brothers.
mhm.
So in those games, you have lots of different characters that do different things and have different styles and strategies of winning. And if you go online, you'll find certain characters will come into a tier list. But something I really appreciate is when you get somebody in one of these tournaments who puts lots of effort into practicing what you would consider a low tier character or a mid tier character, and does very well with them because they have a unique play style, and that player just got really good with it. So and going forward with looking for balanced armies, I also kind of want to encourage different play styles, unique play styles that maybe some people may find frustrating to play, but because you've played this army over and over, you put the games in practicing, you just got really good with it, and you know how to approach every scenario thrown at you.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Well, man, some really cool ideas, Ron. We love it. We love it. So Bozz, what are you kind of thinking here?
Yeah, let's go straight from the really deep and thoughtful ideas to the ideas of someone who doesn't play much competitive. Okay, let's do that. So I really think that the Force organization could do with a bit of tweaking. Um, and I've specifically got in mind the Force, something akin to the Force org chart from like third edition 40K, where you've got your minimum that you have to bring and your maximums of everything that you can bring. And I guess for me, that would simplify my list building over the current Force org rules that OPR have out, where it's, you can have X amount of clones, you can have this amount for every hero that you bring. I find it not only do I find it a little confusing to do without an app to help me to do it, but I also find it really restricts what I can bring in a way that I don't find is beneficial. Obviously, it's there to restrict what you bring, but I don't find at the moment that the Force org is restrictive in a way that is beneficial to building a competitive list. What do you guys think about that?
What do you think, Ryne? Because you kind of hit on this earlier about your 3,000 point worry.
I think that's something to explore. That's definitely something to explore there. Something that I would encourage everybody who plays OPR, it's just because the rule book may have some restrictions on, just say like the force organization. Doesn't mean that you can't, in your own community, come up with something that you think will work there. Obviously, changing the force organization chart is going to change the meta drastically
Yeah.
on what's brought in and whatnot. I think my only problem with that is what do we define? For example, how do we define what would count as a troop within some armies versus others?
Oh yeah,
Sometimes
for
the answer
sure.
may be
And
obvious.
yeah, and
I'm sorry.
I use the example of like the third ed 40K thing as like an example, not something to be like followed slavishly.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about sort of the troops, elites, heavy support, fast attack sort of strategy.
I guess I am. So I guess what
Yeah.
you're saying, Ryne, is true. We would need some way to differentiate, and not everyone's going to agree on that. I didn't say it was a good idea.
Well, you are hitting on something. I mean, I think that it's funny because Ryne, I'm talking about 3000, and sort of an immediate concern on Ryan's mind is, oh wait, 3000 gives you 4 of the same thing. And I think that Ryne was very astute to sort of like that's in the front of his mind, that he's recognizing that, and this happens in Kings of War 2, where the spammability of a unit does sort of can be problematic. So I get where you're coming from, Bozz. I think so. One, I wouldn't mind. I think an easy one is I would love a 3000, 4000 to still keep some of those 3 ofs and 4, like maybe 3 ofs at, until it gets like, I think that can be something relatively easy it's, to say in our version of this, you don't get the 4th unlock until 5000, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty reasonable thing. Giving 3 copies of a unit is honestly, that's pretty much like, that's plenty, I feel. So I agree. Ryne, is there anything just in the force org that you sort of jumps out to you about maybe limiting that's just something for me that I would like to see, is they tighten up a little more on the going up to 4 and 5 ofs.
And you're let me repeat back to the question. You're asking anything inside of OPR that jumps to me in terms of how we would organize
force
forces.
orgs. Yeah. Anything that's sort of on the force organizational level that you think could use some work?
Not off the top of my head. The only thing that, like I said, that I'd be afraid of is just spamming. When we get to the point where people start spamming the same unit over and over, like because it's a really good unit. And maybe I don't know, maybe we can make some definitions on how many of top 6 models you can bring, but I don't want to be too restrictive because again, it comes back to that idea where I enjoy people exploring unique setups. Yeah. You gotta have to find a balance. Make it unique, but don't make it ridiculously unique. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I hear that. And
I wouldn't.
The whole system probably doesn't need an overhaul, like I suggested, but it is something that comes up to my mind when I think about how we could tweak OPR for a bit more competitive balance. That's all.
I would love to see restrictions on certain types like artillery. Like I wouldn't mind to have limits on units with the artillery. So that's the indirect rule. I think that can, putting that down just from fun's sake is going to really, like, I don't like indirect as a rule. I don't know how other people feel about it. So I wouldn't mind some, but I don't know if that's something that I would pitch at this point. It's just more of a personal gripe. So yeah, okay, fair enough.
Also, the caveat there is the vast majority of my games, I don't use Force Org. It's it's this many points, it's bring what you want. And mainly, if I'm playing Human Defense Force, it's just bodies. If I'm playing a 2000 point game, I'll bring a captain and a command squad, and then just troops, 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 because I think it's fun.
Yeah. And it's good too.
It does happen to be good if you can roll halfway decently. So I tend to get tabled quite often, but that's part of the fun too.
All right. Well, Bozz, what else you got?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I'm thinking of doesn't. I guess it might not relate specifically to competitive play, but it's one of my things with OPR in general, and one of the things that I find important in a war game, and that's how the morale rules work. I would love for there to be a little more depth in the morale rules, especially, I guess, in a competitive scene. I'd like there to be some sort of kind of fallback mechanic rather than just you lose a turn, or if you're in close combat, you get automatically wiped. I think automatically wiping is a good thing at a certain point. If you've, taken out X amount, whatever, then yeah, the others are probably going to turn and run or whatever. I think I've seen some really good homebrew morale rules that people use on their own tabletops. I see them in the Facebook groups and the Discord and everything like that. And there's a couple that I think could be adopted by the competitive community quite well.
I do. So one of the reasons, and I bring back to the command point structure, and one of the things that I do agree with you on is the morale spec system is very stark. It's very, like, especially waivers, just a waiver check when it's on a 4-turn game and you lose a turn is just so tough. That's the reason we actually implemented that, just to be able to spend 3 to knock off waivers. I don't like it's at 50% that things start routing. I would love it if it's maybe below 50% or maybe 33%. Maybe
yeah.
I wouldn't mind. I think 50% is just a little too fragile.
Yeah, I think it's still combat effective at 50%, but at 33%, most of your buddies are down, and you might be having, kind thoughts about that beach house in Miami.
Yeah, so that is something that I will definitely meet you on. I'd love to at least test out, is to try to make the break and waiver points at 33%. So yeah, I tried out.
That's what we're here for. What do you think, Ryne?
I see a lot of things online, like you were saying there, Boss, about readjusting the morale system. I actually have no problem with the morale system the way it is currently. And the reason that I say that is I differentiate armies into 2 main categories. You have your high quality armies and then your low quality armies. And I play both. I have a space, the Raven Guard force, which I would consider a high quality. And then I play orcs, where most of my qualities average about 4 or lower than that, and the thing about playing the high quality armies is I know that I have a better chance of holding that objective last minute where it really counts. And if I'm facing a low quality army versus a high, I know they have more numbers than me, but all I got to do is start forcing those morale saves to mitigate them having more activations than me. Start taking units out, when they're down to 50%, because the game's very quick. It's only 4 turns, so I understand I like how quick things can die in this game. The other thing about morale is I think it makes close combat more effective versus shooting. In shooting, if you're trying to force morale, you're just gonna waiver a unit, which will eventually will get back up. Versus the brutality of close combat, if you can make a unit fail morale, you wipe it off, and you don't have to worry about it. If you wipe it off that fast in morale, I would say that it was probably left in the open in the first place. The last thing I'll say is, going back to the high quality versus low quality armies, is that some armies like Space Marines, or I would say Robot Legions, I like the certainty that I will most likely hold on to the objective when I make it down there. It's not 100%, but I like the certainty that I can grab onto it versus lower quality armies and whatnot. But that as a as also an orc player, I understand that once my unit goes 50%, I should probably use it for a backfield objective so that I don't risk it wavering on that final turn. But those are just my thoughts about the morale system.
So I guess what you're saying is true. Like you've paid for that high quality army and you want them to be durable, and that makes sense. I get that. And to go back to something you were saying about the brutality of close combat, I guess that's why I'd kind of like to see a fallback mechanic introduced. So that wavered unit doesn't just lose a turn and then automatically become effective again. It maybe they have to make take another morale test, pass another quality check to get back into the fight or something like that. Just something to make shooting a little more dangerous. Because as you say, it's not anything like the brutality of close combat. And I guess I'd like to see something like that implemented to make it worth its while.
I would say, I mean, I get the quality, but I mean, the quality is sort of also balanced out by less models. So that, I mean, I generally am going to do a little bit of a pushback from Ryne, because I also think that per averages, you will fail just as like you will fail that indicative amount of percents of waivers or morale checks on high quality units, quality 3. And since you paid more for them, every time you fail, it's a larger percent of your army, right? And so I sort of see those as sort of balanced out, right? Yes, you will fail less, but the ones you do fail, since you're a high quality elite army, that failure is much more powerful, right?
Yeah, it hurts.
So it's sort of, I sort of take that as sort of balancing factors. In other words, I sort of, because I played on both sides of it as well. I think though, waivers to me, it's more the undead thing. I think that you're hitting something with robot legions, where I think that undead or robot things just have a distinct advantage over traditional waiver units, because honestly, losing, especially in a game that's objectives are everything, it is so much more important, to lose 50% of your people but still hold an objective, as opposed to not hold an objective, so. But I can see both sides. I guess I will fall more towards Bozz, but I'm willing to I can see both sides.
I do want to say, Daniel, that that I know where you're coming from, and you too, Boss, with the you want that certainty of passing the morale with the high quality army, and sometimes you just don't make that. But that's also why I agree with you where we came from with the command point structure, to either allow a re-roll or an auto pass on I would say more of a re-roll than anything on the morale. The other thing that I just wanted to add there, going back to Boss's point about the command point system, it was a thought I had, but it slipped away until now. Is that, funnily enough, that's one of the reasons I did fly away from 40K, is because there were so many different command points or that things you can do. But I think if we go to Daniel's point I think if we go the command route structure, that can help with things like morale. But as long as we keep the command points or the things you can spin for command points simple and universal, not have them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with that. No teleporting units.
No. If they have to exist, I don't want them to be gotchas. I don't want to have to memorize 26 different rule books.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I appreciate, Ryne, we really appreciate you coming on. Like, if you're in the Dallas area, you want to play OPR, definitely there is the Dallas OPR Facebook page that Ryne's an admin on. Go check him out. He's an awesome guy. doing some awesome things that me and Sam were jealous. We hated to leave. Ryne, thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, and just thanks everyone. So also, we will reiterate this again. All these things we're suggesting, we don't know if they're good. This is things we want to try ourselves.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We would love to know your opinions. We can be wrong about any of this stuff. So, Bozz, any last thoughts?
Just that it's really good to have these discussions and keep them going, because that's how we as a community can move towards something that suits us, something that we can tweak and make our own. And that's what's so awesome about this game, is that it's actively encouraged. So more conversations like this, please.
Yeah. And I love, I'll just close out in saying that as well, that I love that we can have these discussions, that they're meaningful. But okay, well, Ryne, you get the last word.
I just want to agree with you guys that we should have these discussions. I've been saying for a while that the future of wargaming isn't held in the hands of these large companies that have different IPs and whatnot. They definitely help with the spread of war games, but the real future is held in the hands of those who love it, who love the games and who love to play. I see eventually where there's going to be, with the rise of 3D printing and just the internet in general, we're going to see more different rules written by people not paid to do it, but because they love to play war games, and they'll post their little rule set on free, and the word will get spread about it. And I really think that's the direction that this hobby is going to be going.
Well said.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, everyone. It's been Any War Game, Anytime.
Thank you, guys.
Any war game, anytime. Going where the game is good.